voice in your head right now? It might be younger than you think. Something extraordinary happened to human consciousness about 3,000 years ago. Before that, according to psychologist Julian Jaynes, our ancestors experienced their thoughts in a radically different way. They didn't have an inner monologue like we do. Instead, they heard voices they believed came from gods. It sounds wild, but stick with me. Hi, welcome to another episode in the Tensor Space. In 1976, Jaynes published a book that shook our understanding of human consciousness. He argued that for most of civilization, the human mind worked more like a split brain, one part generating thoughts, the other receiving them as auditory hallucinations. He called this the bicameral mind. Picture yourself in ancient Mesopotamia around 7000 BCE. You're working in the fields when suddenly you face a problem you've never encountered before. Instead of thinking it through like we would today, you'd hear a commanding voice giving you instructions. And this wasn't metaphorical. You'd genuinely experience it as a god speaking to you. The really fascinating part is how this system helped build civilization. Think about the challenge of organizing thousands of people without phones, emails, or written language. How do you get everyone to work together? The bicameral mind offered a solution. When leaders couldn't be physically present, people would still hear guiding voices telling them what to do. Let's dig into how this actually worked. Your brain's right hemisphere would generate these commands, while your left hemisphere experienced them as external voices. This isn't as strange as it might sound. Even today, split-brain patients, people whose brain hemispheres have been surgically separated, sometimes experience one hand acting independently of their conscious control. It's like having two separate systems running in parallel. The evidence gets even more interesting when you look at ancient civilizations. Take Mesopotamia's ziggurats, massive temple complexes built at enormous cost of labor and resources. We usually think of them as purely religious monuments. But what if they were actually tools for maintaining this bicameral system? The same goes for the elaborate death masks of Egyptian pharaohs, the oracle at Delphi, and the ancestor tablets of ancient China. These weren't just symbols. They were technologies for hearing the guiding voices that kept society functioning. Ancient literature gives us more clues. In the Iliad, characters never pause for internal reflection. When Achilles faces a decision, he doesn't weigh his options. Instead, Athena physically appears and pulls his hair to stop him from drawing his sword. Modern readers often see this as poetic imagery, but Jaynes argued it was literally describing how people experience decision-making. The same pattern appears in other ancient texts. Early parts of the Bible are full of people directly hearing God's voice. But in later books, prophets start complaining that God has become silent. According to Jaynes, this wasn't just a theological shift. It was documenting the breakdown of the bicameral mind. This breakdown happened around 2000 BCE, and it wasn't peaceful. As societies grew more complex, the old system started failing. Trade brought people into contact with others who heard different gods. Writing created new ways of storing and transmitting information. Wars forced people to adapt quickly to novel situations. The voices that had guided humans for thousands of years began falling silent. Imagine the chaos this would cause. It's like if the internet suddenly disappeared today. Our whole way of organizing society would break down. Ancient people responded by desperately trying to maintain contact with their gods. They built bigger temples, created more elaborate rituals, and consulted oracles. But gradually, a new form of consciousness emerged, the internal mind space we all experience today. You can actually trace this transformation through ancient writings. Earlier texts show no evidence of introspection or internal thought. Characters simply act or respond to divine voices. But later texts start showing signs of inner reflection. By the time of ancient Greece's Golden Age, you get philosophers like Plato explicitly discussing the nature of thought and consciousness. Modern neuroscience has found some fascinating parallels to Jaynes's theory. Studies of auditory hallucinations show they often activate the same brain regions involved in normal speech processing. People who hear voices often report them coming from specific locations in space, just like regular sounds. and research on split brain patients has revealed just how separately our brain hemispheres can operate. But here's where things get really interesting. Some researchers think we might be experiencing another transformation in consciousness right now. We're increasingly relying on artificial intelligence for guidance and decision-making. When you ask Siri for directions, or let Netflix choose your next show, you're essentially consulting an external oracle. The voices aren't coming from gods anymore, but from algorithms. This might sound concerning, but remember, consciousness has already gone through at least one major transformation. The inner voice you consider you emerged from an earlier way of thinking that would seem completely alien to us now. And that earlier system wasn't primitive or stupid. It built the pyramids, created the first cities, and laid the foundations for all human civilization. A lot of scientists disagree with Jaynes's theory, and for good reason. It's incredibly hard to prove how ancient people experienced their own thoughts, but even if he wasn't right about everything, his ideas raise fascinating questions about the nature of consciousness itself. What if our familiar way of thinking, with its inner monologue and sense of self, isn't the natural state of the human mind? What if it's just one possible operating system, one that evolved to handle the specific challenges our ancestors faced? And if that's true, what other forms of consciousness might be possible? Some of history's biggest mysteries start making sense if you look at them through this lens. Why did ancient civilizations spend so much time and energy building temples and consulting oracles? Why do religious texts from around the world describe God speaking directly to humans? Why did so many ancient cultures practice divination and prophecy? They might not have been just superstitious. They might have been responding to a fundamentally different way of experiencing reality.